Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, we want to say thank you for joining us today for our webinar. We're going to be talking about Copilot today. My name is Demetrius Rogers. I'll go on camera just for a moment. My name is Demetrius Rogers. I'm for Plant Technologies. I'm the CTO over here for commercial and SLED operations. And we also have John Homer from Microsoft joining us.
Hello, everybody. Wait for my camera to hopefully show on. Hello, everybody. John Horner with Microsoft. Nice to meet everybody. I think I've got the first part of this webinar, so I'm going to kick off a little bit and talking about, maybe myself a little bit. I've been with Microsoft for about 15 years, working in the cloud the entire time. Now, of course, Copilot is the big thing. Today's webinar is going to be more about kind of what do we got Copilot, how do we kind of manage some things, but I wanted to kind of start out with, this. Hopefully you guys have all noticed this Message Center post that showed up a couple weeks ago inside of Message Center, letting you know that beginning in mid-April, so mid to late April, we'll be rolling out the what's now called Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat. So this is Copilot for everyone. So all of your licensed users, this is going to be included with the licensing you own today. We're rolling that out today. So just want to get everybody kind of aware of that and talk a little bit about what does this all kind of mean for us. Oh, and I didn't take control, so I didn't use slides, didn't move for everybody else. So now let's make sure that everybody's on the right slide here, talking about Copilot Chat for GCC customers. So this is rolling out now mid to late April. So within the next month, everybody should have this included capability with their users. So one thing to kind of bear in mind is that web grounding will be off by default. Just like if there are those of you that have purchased Microsoft 365 Copilot, rolled it out inside your tenant, you've noticed that web grounding was turned off by default. It's going to be in this included version turned off by default. We'll still have the power of the large language model to help users understand content, be able to upload content and things like that, but it will not have access to the internet for grounding or providing answers for users' questions unless you turn that on. And there's a couple other things here that we talked about, removing access to Copilot Chat if you want. So with that, I think I'm just going to share my screen and let's go into the tenant and let me go and kind of show what does this all mean. So let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So today, when a GCC customer, GCC user goes to what's called copilot.microsoft.com, you might see a little login authentication option up here. I'm not seeing it when I go there because I'm actually authenticated into the browser with my GCC identity. You're going to see two things here. Notice that if we wanted to use it for personal use, it says switch to my personal account. So this is all about the identity that you're logged into Copilot with. If we click here to go to Copilot in the cloud, if I click here today, because this tenant has Microsoft 365 Copilot in it, I'm going to get to the Microsoft 365 Copilot functionality. I'm not going to get to that included version because that's not available yet. So your users would get here. Now, one thing to kind of bear in mind, because we see this a lot, we see a lot of confusion about, okay, which is the right one? How do I know I'm in the right one? As a user, we can kind of understand, oh, but I didn't want to see weather. I wanted to go to Copilot. As a consumer product, if we log in, if I had chosen the option to sign in with my consumer identity, I'd still get to Copilot, but it would look like this. So it's a different look and feel, even though the icons look a lot alike, it's a different look and feel. We want to be cognizant of this with our users as well to make sure that they understand if they get here, they're in the wrong place. We want to get to the page that looks like this. Now, over on the right-hand side of this screen, this is a commercial tenant. They have the Copilot chat capabilities there already. Same kind of thing. Am I looking for personal? Am I looking for work? I'm going to go look. I want to use it for work, so it should authenticate me and get me into that location. It looks exactly the same as what I've got on the left, but the one on the right only has that included capability, not the Microsoft 365 Copilot. So they look and feel a lot alike. It will, we don't see it on the right-hand side, but you will see this web search is turned off. If you decide that you would like to enable web search for your users, what you'll need to do is go into the cloud service policy, and don't give it a nonsense name like I just did. We have the ability to scope this capability just onto certain users if we want, or we can do it for the entire user base that have access to the Microsoft 365 Copilot chat. But what we're going to look for, and what we need to, the rule we have to do, we want to, easiest way I've found is just search web, because you're going to find allow web search in Copilot. Now, I'm seeing that we've turned it off because it hasn't been configured. If we configure this for a user and enable it, then they'll be able to ground their searches against the internet. That means not just using the power of the large language model, be able to ground it against the internet. Now, another thing to bear in mind, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about this today, but this is more about how we, afterwards, how are we securing data, stuff like that, which is a lot of what this session is going to be about. We have the ability to attach files or type information inside of these files. The one thing to bear in mind is that when we attach a file here, it's not going to the large language model. It's actually going to the OneDrive for Business of this user. So if I go out to OneDrive for Business, you will notice inside of a user's OneDrive, there will be a special folder that is created for users once we have this capability. And that folder says, let me get it here, Microsoft 365 Copilot chat files. So if I attach a file there, this Copilot that's going to be included doesn't have access to information that's already inside of our tenant. It'll only have access to the internet if we provide that, or through agents that are coming later on. And I'll talk about that real quickly here. I don't want to take up the entire session talking about this, but it uploads. But notice in this scenario, I have 3 files of the exact same name and 4 files of the exact same name. Why is that? Because it has access during that session that we have inside of Copilot. I can upload it, and Copilot will have access to help us understand that document while that session's taking place. Once we start a new conversation, a new chat, it no longer has access to it because it doesn't natively have access to what we have going on inside of our tenant. So we have to continue to upload. But this is, I wanted to kind of show this so as people are worried that is my information going to be released to the internet? Is it going to be used to train the large language model? And with all of our Copilots, definitely not used to train the large language model, not released to the internet. But this is where that data goes when you attach that file. It goes to your OneDrive for Business. Now, what's going to be coming then down the road for us to be able to leverage these things that we have, and maybe another session we can talk a little about Copilot Studio, but when we have the capability to have that chat, and we have the capability to have the agents, which again is not going to be in GCC tenants. I don't have a hard timeline yet, but I'm hearing June, July-ish timeframe. So once we have that ability with those Copilot agents to be available to us, then we can grant these users that have access to the included chat capability to some of the data that we have inside of our tenant by creating agents through Copilot Studio. An example of that is, once this completely loads, off to the right, we're going to see that I have a listing of agents that I have access to. These agents are created and kind of published out for users to be able to use. But my scenario here is there is an HR site, an HR location that houses things like, when can, what's our vacation time? What is our work from home policy, et cetera. We're able to publish these agents out to users so they can click on this agent. Again, we can populate questions. Hey, these are the most often asked questions. So if a user wants to know what is our remote work policy, they can simply click on that, ask the policy, and this agent is now querying the information that we gave it access to inside of our tenant to provide them an answer. So we call it Copilot for everyone. We want to have everybody have the access to that large language model and be able to leverage it to find answers. But that included one is going to find us answers on the internet, and our, time off policy is not available on the internet. It's internal information that we have access to. A Microsoft 365 Copilot user has access to that because it has access to all the data in the tenant, but that included version won't have it. When agents hit GCC, and then, like I said, probably about the June to July timeframe, we'll be able to make these little mini agents. Hey, one for HR assistant, one for maybe help desk, etc. I have several customers that I talk with that have worked really, really hard to put together a knowledge base to help their help desk team solve problems faster. That's a perfect example of we already have the knowledge put together. Let's create an agent pointed at that knowledge and then allow the rest of our user base to have access to that as well. When they have an issue, I don't understand how to do this on my computer, I can't change my screen resolution, any number of little things, let them go ask that agent first. If that agent addresses their question, great. If it doesn't, through some other things we have coming with agents, we have the ability then to kind of translate or transfer that into a support ticket that our help desk team can reach out to us and help us assist on. So that's really what all I wanted to do is kind of talk about what is coming, get us ready. So hopefully it's not a surprise and you saw what was going on in the message center. But if you didn't, I want us to all be aware that in somewhere between the next 2 to 4 weeks, we're going to have access to that Copilot for everyone, that Microsoft 365 Copilot chat experience that's going to be included with all of the licensing that we own today. And once that happens, let us know. We'll be more than happy to have more conversations with you, and especially as we get down the road to where agents capabilities are there as well. Let us know. We can help you try to build some agents, get those going inside the organization. All right, I promised I promised the Planet team I'd take about 15 minutes, and I think I'm right on task. So good.
No, you're good, Johnny. Just to that point, it was announced today that SharePoint agents actually went live in GCC today, and agents that were grounded in SharePoint data. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Yes, if you've ever went out to that blog article from back in December when we said, hey, what's coming, and we made the call out between what's Microsoft 365 Copilot, what's Copilot Chatter, we called it Microsoft Copilot back then, and we talked about that phased rollout of Copilot, of Microsoft 365 Copilot. We've met that basically with one exception. The OneDrive Copilot is not there yet, and I don't have a definitive timeline on when it's going to be there. But if you're ever out to that blog article and you see that phase 1, phase 2, everything in phase 2 other than the OneDrive should be available today.
Yeah. So thank you. Um, So today we're gonna, and thank you, John. I know I didn't introduce myself earlier, but I just want to also give you a little bit of my background before we get too far into this. Again, my name is Demetrius Rogers. I am the Chief Technology Officer here at Planet for SLED and Commercial Operations. I've been at Planet now for about almost 3 years, and now how time flies. Prior to joining Planet, I was actually a customer. I was the Chief Operating Officer, and prior to that, Deputy Chief Operating Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia's centralized IT agency, VITA, where I was responsible for running all IT for all executive branch agencies. I was a Planet customer then, and I'm a Planet employee now. So just wanted to give you a little bit of background by myself. So today we're going to talk about, Microsoft Copilot. I always like to start these conversations off with understanding the Copilot universe, because when we start talking about Copilot, it's always important to ground yourself in terms of which Copilot we're talking about, right? So this one we're going to be focusing specifically on modern work, which is my slides aren't working here. Let me move that. The today we're going to Microsoft 365, Copilot 365, which is focused around the modern work. And you can see what modern work is there, which encompasses everything for Copilot, for Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, etc. Teams, very important, um, etc. So this is like the 365 is obviously user-based. It allows you to control who actually is enabled for Copilot 365. If that's a concern. If you want to say, I want to do part of the organization, then we'll talk a little bit about that today in terms of how that is accomplished. Uh,
Demetrius, if you don't mind, I want to kind of back up 1 second. I want to kind of, this is what I think has helped some of my customers understand this, because it's confusing as all get out. Copilot, and I know Demetrius said there's 50. I think right might now we might have over 90 Copilots available today.
yes.
Think of Copilot as Microsoft's brand for AI. that maybe helps a little bit understand, whatever, throw out Nike. Nike is a brand of shoes, and there's all kinds of different shoes we could wear. Copilot is Microsoft's brand for AI, and there's many, many different AIs. So when you talk to people about Copilot, it's very easy. We say Copilot, Copilot, Copilot. I find myself doing it all the time, but really it's
Yes.
the brand for that artificial intelligence, or even the user interface for that artificial intelligence. So,
Yes.
all right.
Thank
So I just want to kind of add that quick. 'Cause maybe it helps people understand about and make it a little bit less confusing because
you.
we have so many Copilots it confuses me
Yeah,
sometimes.
I absolutely agree, which is why I always start off every presentation, especially with new customers, with this slide. That way we can baseline the conversation and allow people to ask questions specific to, you know, that specific co-pilot, but also make sure they're in the right meeting. Um, so the next one is also understanding, we're going to talk a little bit about the typical co-pilot for M365 journey, right? Most people are typically in phase one or phase two, right? Or a combination thereof. We do have a number of folks that are actually in phase three now, but I will suggest probably for the purpose of this conversation, most are in one through three or somewhere in between. Um, and the reason why this is important is because when we start talking about folks that want to get, who's starting at number one, they want to kind of dip their toes, right? They're saying, hey, I want to get a little bit more familiar. I'm not sure if I want to go full bore yet. However, I do want to start understanding what it's going to take. And maybe they purchased a couple of licenses. A number of customers probably placed, 25, 50, 100 licenses, and they're trying to figure out, all right, now what do I do? Right. So, because they want to assess for their organization on whether or not they can actually use Copilot. So they start looking at the organizational readiness strategy. They want to understand the vision. They want to be able to say, hey, how can I prove some value to my organization in terms of return on investment? And so the proof of value engagement is actually a really good engagement to do that. As you can see, it's about a 4 week engagement total timeline. Can go a little bit longer, but it consists of, the workshops, user immersion workshops, understanding the different scenarios, helping you establish success criteria, developing a business case, and all those types of things. The other part is also helping you actually start leveraging and understanding what building an agent looks like. And again, in GCC, you can do that with SharePoint agents or agents grounded in SharePoint as of today. So that's great news. But also being able to understand what that looks like. Then we have customers that say, you know what, I want to know what I need to do to prepare to roll this out organizational wide, right? Enterprise wide. And what does that actually engagement looks like? And so for the more mature customers that may be here today, they're saying, hey, I want to understand, I want to go from, zero today from the discovery and planning phase all the way to user enablement and then focusing on continuous adoption and deployment. We have an engagement called our enablement and pilot engagement. And this is broken down where we start off with the discovery and planning phase. We also work with you on the readiness and remediation phase, which meaning creating a technical action plan to help you address all the things that were identified in the discovery and planning phase, talking to you about your data security, your governance plan, and your strategy, helping you create adoption goals and being able to have a dashboard via Vivid Insights. We focus heavily on user enablement, and we do that through our organizational change management team. As you all know, that all technology projects are simply enablers until you focus on getting how the users are actually going to use it to drive business value. So we have a lot of conversations to make sure the users understand how they can leverage it, work with you on your communication strategy. We create prompt engineering workshops because every user is going to leverage Copilot differently. The people in your finance department are going to use it for different. The people in the marketing department, HR department, a little bit differently from there. So we have these user-based persona engineering workshops that can help you actually um, train your users on how they're going to leverage Copilot for the things they do day to day to drive value. And then we also have the continuous evaluation and adoption, which we start focusing on continuous use case development. Again, agents is part of that as well, but also helping you start to drive value throughout the organization. Now, regardless of where you are in terms of your Copilot journey, whether you're saying, "Hey, I have 100 licenses, I want to dip my toe in it," or I want to go to full enablement. One of the first things you're going to have to understand is how you're going to quantify the return on investment for an organization, right? So we talk about that up front with all our customers, being able to translate time into tangible value. I know a lot of people talk about value and they talk about cost in terms of return on value. Time is actually tangible value, and being able to measure that, it shows you how you can save time with Copilot per employee, help you document your process improvement. How do you capture operational efficiencies, being able to quantify the time it takes in different areas in terms of backlogs of document processing or approval cycles, as well as being able to work across departments, and then building those business cases out, right? Whether you're developing department specific metrics, or you're trying to say, look, I had it before and after. I want to make sure, how was I doing things before Copilot for these pilot users? How long did the process take after? Being able to establish some clear baselines based on that. And so the Copilot proof of value engagement helps you actually, with those real world identifying those benefits, right? Specific for use cases, identification. We work with you to identify those high value business cases. We can test and exfile Copilot in your environment. You can create customized agents in terms of HR, public records management, customer engagement. Specifically today, if those live in a SharePoint environment, a lot of those agents, a lot of customers keep all the data in their M65 tenant, so that would be good. Um, Also, being able to start developing some internal expertise, right? Identifying one or two people in your organization, even several people, because it takes about 100 licenses to do that. To be able to qualify for the proof of value engagement, but being able to identify those co-pilot champions who are going to drive that adoption within your organization, help your users understand, be able to work with you to create your roadmap for deployment across the departments, and then being able to start, you know, quantifying that ROI like I talked about earlier, but to really develop a customer business case based on what you actually experience through your Copilot proof value engagement. Um, Also, it's important to know that the Copilot proof of value engagement helps drive adoption, right? By moving from, hey, I'm aware of this thing, to, and I'm a little bit skeptical in terms of, what it can do or what we can do with Copilot for 365, to actually being able to say, oh, that this is, this actually works and this is what we're able to accomplish, right? So being able to have a structured POV, to drive enthusiasm from your users, also being able to work with those early adopters to drive that organic adoption, to speak to other stakeholders or other groups in there to say, hey, this is what we're using it. This is how it's help improve, this process that I had to do every day, of this activity, etc. But also focusing again on building competence, building confidence within your organization, being able to measure your comfort levels through the experiments, and then be able to adjust based on that user experience. Watching as those experience with Copilot start to mature. I was a Copilot. I was one of our early adopters in our organization here at Planet, and I can tell you that I'm just like everybody else, where the early on days I was still trying to figure out, okay, what can I use this with? How do I best get value out of this thing to drive improvement of things I do every day? Because we all know, if you don't see immediate value, we tend to step back to things that we did or how we did things yesterday. So it really took a conscious effort, and through these types of engagements, it actually helps people understand on how you're going to drive that value. I'm a frequent user of Copilot today. I think it's fantastic based on the things it helps me do in terms of time savings. But also, one of the biggest points is that being able to demonstrate that value from a government perspective, right? What does real world use cases look like for the government entities, and then how does that translate into um, proven time savings and driving of end user adoption of Copilot? And so a lot of these things will be proved out during a Copilot proof value engagement, to be able to create that momentum that you're going to need as you look to expand your uses of Copilot within your environment. One of the conversations that I always have when I'm having this conversation, this goes into something that John said. Not only do we have to baseline the conversation about what we're here to talk about today, one of the things a
Hey,
conversation I always
Demetrius,
get into, yes.
before you go in, we do have a couple of questions about that last section. Do you mind taking them now?
No, I don't mind at all, please.
Okay, so one of the questions that was asked was, what's the best way to control the rollout with all but a few users that already have access?
The best way to control the deployment of Copilot when
Yep.
everybody has access, I want to make sure I answer the question. So one way, I think if that's the question is, you can actually deploy Copilot 365 is only available to users that have a license. And so you would actually be able to say, I'm going to grant, 5, 10, 20, 25 users or whatever the case is, the license, assign them a license for M365 Copilot, and then that will enable the capability. Does that answer the question? Please feel free to come off mute if it doesn't.
Back to see who that was. So that was Charles. I'm gonna see whether I can get to you, Charles. Um, one of the
Charles, if
things
you
that,
want to come off mute, raise your hand and we can find you in the list.
Okay.
All right, I don't see him. Sorry about
No,
that. Who?
no. And he says, no, we are referring to the Copilot for all. I'm assuming you're talking about the Copilot chat
yeah,
that John was just talking about. So with that being just available, with that just becoming available in GCC, John, do you want to take that question or I can?
Yeah, so I mean, controlling the rollout. So number one, bear in mind, we haven't really talked about things like enterprise data protection and all of that. So when it rolls out, when it becomes available to you, it has access to nothing.
Mhm.
No access to the internet unless you go in and make that cloud service policy to give it access to the internet. Has no access to data you have inside of your tenant. Only has access to what the user puts into that chat prompt or the user attaches using that paperclip. So your permission models, just like Microsoft 365 Copilot, your permission models are are the first line of defense to make sure that, hey, that data is secure. Because it doesn't have access to it, I don't know that you want to hold back, because users, we want to have them access to it. But there's, the enterprise data protection is there to make sure that if you've identified information and you've created a DLP policy that says that information should not leave our tenant, Copilot will honor that. And if somebody puts something sensitive into that chat prompt, when that prompt goes to the large language model, Copilot pulls it out because Copilot's also an orchestrator of of what's going on as well, making sure that we're living by the rules you have in place inside of your tenant, but it also strips out shorter search queries and things that sends a large language model and does quite a few things as well. But controlling it really is going to be, there are ways in that blog post, or in that message center post, there should be ways to tell how you can turn it off if you want, things like that. But I would say Charles, if you would like a deeper conversation on this, reach out to Planet, reach out to Microsoft and get me on a call with you. But we can certainly have a deeper conversation about what we could do with that rollout.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also, yeah, okay. Any other questions, Ivy, before I?
yeah. So there were a couple of questions about interacting with files, particularly around Copilot Chat as well as Copilot, the paid version of Copilot. Like, do you have to upload it into the chat, or if you just upload it to SharePoint, does it work?
Well, that depends on whether we're talking about the paid Microsoft 365 Copilot
Correct.
or the included Microsoft 365 Copilot chat. So the
Correct.
paid one, as long as you put it in your tenant somewhere, it's powered by me as the user, so it has access to all my email, all my Teams meetings, all my Teams chats, all my documents I have in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, etc. then that works. If you're talking about the included version, because it does not have access to anything by default, it only has access to what we give it, and it will not have access to internal information until we have the chat, or excuse me, the agent capability that will roll out, like I said, in June, July. Then we can give it some access, and there's a different way we kind of pay for that. So the answer is yes and no, depending on which Copilot is you're talking about.
Yes.
Another question that just came in was around Copilot, particularly if you have something that's search enabled, right? Data, including queries, don't leave the tenant. So how does that coincide with the being able to also, ground on the internet?
Right. You want this one, Demetrius? Or want me
So
to take it?
yeah, so I assume I'll take it, John. So I assume that you're referring to, does the data like actually leave the tenant when you enter a query for Copilot? And the answer to that question is no. Um, your data itself does not leave your N65 security boundary. The interaction with the large language model is done within the Azure area, but it was only like the prompts. And I'm happy to have a very detailed security conversation around this. But also, I want you to remember, 'cause I see something in the chat around Azure about OpenAI's publicly available services. It's also important to note that Microsoft's Azure OpenAI services live within Azure environment. It does not go out and leverage the publicly available OpenAI service. But the interaction between your tenant data to the Microsoft Azure OpenAI, it's only available, the data itself does not go out. There is information that's exchanged in terms of prompts between the large language model itself, and that would send it back to you. And I have some diagrams that help explain that.
Right, and that's part of what the orchestration of Copilot does is, yes, I ask this big long prompt in Copilot, it's going to extract smaller things because the large language model search engines, they still want very short defined search terminology. Hey, if we put a 10,000 character prompt into Bing or Google, we're going to get back so much baloney information that doesn't have to do with what we want to do. So that's one of the things that Copilot does. It extracts smaller search queries to send out, and then it compiles it and brings it back. So your data being your data does not leave your tenant. Now, that comes with a little bit of a caveat, in my opinion, because potentially every word in the English language could be part of the data inside your tenant. And if nothing got to leave your tenant, then what would go to the large language model? Well, there's a lot of things that happen, and there are some things where there's like vector queries that we send to kind of replace the data, stuff like that. So it's a complex way we kind of do it. But yes, your main point there is your data and does not leave your tenant. We go into the service boundary to supply to search whatever you told us to search to find the answers. But the one thing I like to say is that remember that with Microsoft 365 Copilot and with Copilot Chat, we're bringing the large language model to you rather than you bringing your data to the large language model. So with Microsoft 365 Copilot, we just let the large language model query what you have going on, so it doesn't have to go to the internet, doesn't have to go these places to find answers.
Correct.
There was another question that came in around data retention for Copilot. So the queries that get asked, that a user asks in Copilot, how long are they retained for, and where are they retained?
So those do get retained. They are retained, at least from a user perspective, because I can see all my former prompts, right?
Yep.
The how long, I think, is going to be based on your organizational policies. And so you said
Correct.
that users can actually delete that themselves, but based on your default retention policies, is how long they'll be available.
Correct.
I also see a question, and this one I'll let you answer, John. Just is about the difference between agents coming in June, July, and the SharePoint
Yep.
agents that
Yep.
came out
I
today.
saw that one. Chad asked that question. So SharePoint agents mean you have to be inside of SharePoint. And they're going to be a little button where you're in a document library in SharePoint. You just easy button say create an agent. And it just automatically creates an agent out of that document repository. What's coming in with the agents inside in the June-July timeframe is the ability for us to put those agents pinned off to the right-hand side, like I kind of showed in that demo with that HR agent, so that we can have that capability. The other thing is, yeah, so we don't have to go to that SharePoint site to leverage that agent. We can leverage it right there inside the chat interface. So that's how things are going to be a little bit different there. And you know, your SharePoint agent's going to have access to whatever documents were in that SharePoint file. The agent that we can create in June or July can have multiple, can have up to 20 different data sources, if you will. So it could be 2 or 3 or 4 different SharePoint document libraries rather than just one, if we wanted it to be. It could be 2 or 3 SharePoint libraries and something going on in ServiceNow and something going on in a public-facing website if we wanted to. We can mix all that together and say, okay, AI. So that's the big thing with Copilot Studio now, that where we have AI in the mix. No longer do we have to create chatbots where we have basically provided a list of answers that can address questions asked and we mapped them out. We can still do that, but what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, artificial intelligence, you go search all this information to provide the answers to the questions my users are asking, and I don't have to do that type of stuff, but we can then put in multiple locations, and that's going to be probably the big difference of the two. There's not a, so this one just came in, the last one. There's not a LLM deployed per tenant. So it sits in your larger service boundary. So it's part of your data center. So it's inside of the Microsoft ecosystem, inside of your data center, but it is not one dedicated specifically to your tenant.
Correct.
Okay. And then I think that basically catches us up for most of these questions. There was one follow-up here around user deleting prompt history. Will Purview eDiscovery still be able to show what the user had previously prompted?
Yes, that is you as an organization set what that retention schedule is. The user delete, just like we do with email, with a document in SharePoint, whatever. Users can delete it, but we have a retention policy that says we're going to keep that for a period of time. So yes, you still have that access to that.
Yes. One of the conversations we always have too, and I can see where, perhaps some folks on this call even have some of the questions. They say, hey, when I have a number of AI scenarios in my head, what tool do I necessarily leverage, right? We have M65 Copilot, we have Azure AI Foundry, we have Copilot Studio. And so one of the things that we like to have conversation with our customers about is, hey, there's a decision tree in terms of what you should look to leverage based on your specific needs. M365 Copilot is focused on personal productivity, where you have the other two focused on business functionality and automation. And so one thing that I find helps in this conversation a lot of times is when you start thinking, hey, I'm trying to drive some personal productivity within my organization. That's a great use case for M365 Copilot, right? If that's not in one of your goals, then you look to say, maybe look at move on to the next option because you're focused on business productivity, right? So maybe you want to be able to say, hey, I want a platform for developing and deploying OpenAI models, right? Based on specific business functionality. You can use Azure AI Foundry. And then, or you could be looking at, hey, I want to integrate, AI into various applications and services for both personal productivity and business functionality. You can use Copilot Studio for that type of service engagement. And so
sorry, just for a second, I love this piece because in true Microsoft fashion, there is more than one way to skin the proverbial cat. Everything you think of could maybe be done in Microsoft 365 Copilot, could maybe be done in Copilot Studio, could maybe be done in Azure AI. And this is where I really love that Planet can help you understand, yes, it could happen 3 or 4 different ways, but which is the best way for us to accomplish what it is we're trying to do. And that's where a deeper conversation kind of needs to have. So sometimes when a customer comes to me, it's not an easy, answer. Hey, this is the thing to do. No, maybe it's something else better that falls somewhere else. And that is, why we have, at this time, probably upwards of 90 different co-pilots around. There's something for different things, and why you can create your own solutions is because what's right for one scenario may work for another, but may not be the best option for that scenario.
Absolutely. And then you start getting into, the questions, which leads to this one right here, and I see somebody put something very similar in the chat, but you can see, hey, something can be done alone. There's something that could be enhanced of the better together story, right? And so we have these AI decision conversations with a number of our customers to help them understand what's the best path for them to achieve the target outcome that they're trying to achieve, right? So we have this decision guide in a couple different ways. We kind of simplified it a couple different ways to kind of show here's the various scenarios. This is an eye chart. I'm not expect you to read it, but just to kind of show, the different things that come into play there. Now, when we want to refocus back on, hey, where are you with your Copilot, in your Copilot journey, and how do you kind of look to start getting that value? Here's the things that you can do in terms of when we start talking about specifically on the proof of value conversations that I alluded to earlier. You can quantify the value, start looking at one of the things I highly encourage you guys to read if you haven't read it already is the Forrester Total Economic Impact Study for Copilot. I have the link there. I think we can make these slides available so you guys can read it, but also start looking at, what are some metrics and relevant government functions that we can apply AI to and leverage Copilot for. But also being able to start calculating potential time savings and search delivery improvements, right? You want to start looking at, when I was in the government, everything I did, I wanted to make sure, hey, I had a certain methodology to deploy things, whether I had a service portfolio lifecycle management process or I had, a specific pilot POC type of setup where I would be able to start saying, okay, we're going to do this very guided, very structured. Here you can, we have the proof of value engagement, which could potentially be funded by Microsoft. I say potentially based on where you are, but it does have a 100-seat minimum. But you can also look, with that, you can select some high value or high impact departments for initial deployment, and then start to establish your success metrics, right, based on your agency's priorities. Also, make sure you get your stakeholder buy-in, right? That's going to be key. Make sure everybody's on the same page in terms. And with that being said, sometimes you need to schedule a separate Copilot executive briefing. We're happy to support that. I'm sure your Microsoft account reps are happy to support that. To also help you understand where Copilot will align with your organizational initiatives, right, and how that can potentially bring value there. The next thing is being able to understand the compliance and governance requirements that your organization has and things that you're going to pass on in terms of being able to leverage Copilot. One of the things that people do, and we've done it internally, is before we assign a Copilot license, we make everyone take a test. I mean, not test, but a training program, and then we get a certificate. We know they know how to use it, and then we'll give them a license. So depending on what you have, where you are, we also have capabilities around that. But then contact us for that conversation if you're unsure where to go. And then with that being said, I'll pause for additional questions.
Another question came in around the best way to um, find out or stay abreast with everything that is in the Copilot family since it's changing all the time. I know we're going to send the slides after, but is there any other resource that you'd recommend?
Oh, I mean, so I am a frequent blog reader, and I also have weekly meetings with Microsoft. We plan this also in the Jumpstart program. I don't, I so I get Teams notifications daily, in terms of things that are coming for the average person. I'd have to defer to John about additional resources on that, but
Yeah,
it comes out so quickly. It's the only constant we have in this industry is change, and that pace of change in this AI era has increased threefold, right? Or tenfold. So
yes, and that's a very common question I get asked is there a chart that shows all the co-pilots and all that? And the answer, unfortunately, right now is yes and no. So show of hands or raise your hand. Anybody here familiar with the Aaron Dinage puts out something called Microsoft 365 Copilot Maps? Or not Copilot Maps, it's m365maps.com. That's what it is. Well, if you go out there and it's m365maps.com, the very top heading now is AI and copilots. So if you click on it, you will see probably the best thing I have right now. It's kind of talks about who's it built for, consumer, all staff, knowledge workers, etc., and which would be kind of the corresponding copilot that would work there. That's probably the best thing I've seen available today. Does it list out every single, like I mentioned earlier, 90 possibly different copilots? Does it list them all out? No, it doesn't. A couple members of my team are currently, we're trying to map out something in maybe a decision tree kind of a thing to help us get to the right thing. But there really isn't anything good that I'm aware of that kind of shows all of them. But M365 Maps is probably the best thing that I've seen so far today.
Mhm.
Yay, Anissa's
There
put it
was
in
a
the chat window for
question.
us.
Yeah, and there was a question. Yeah, somebody put that in chat window, so I was going to reference that. There was another question about the user adoption, Christian. Yeah, so Planet, we have a training platform called Evolve 365. And there's a Copilot module in there. And the Evolve 365 Planet covers all things Microsoft, right? So not just Copilot and AI, but it's a training platform for users, and also come with human services. Happy to have a conversation around that if you're interested in something like that. But a number of our customers are using that platform to stay abreast of all things that are coming, right? When Microsoft makes changes to Copilot or any new functionality comes out on Copilot, it's usually published on our training platform within a week after that.
There was one comment question kind of earlier. It seems like there's a paid version Copilot for M365 and Copilot Chat that will be in the app launcher. Well, there shouldn't be both. There should be just one. And the experience the user gets determines the licensing they have once they get to that page. Today in GCC tenants, the only option we have is Microsoft 365 Copilot. And maybe, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen again and let's kind of show that.
Don't mind it.
Right here. All right, and let's pop this up. So today, when I showed you earlier, these two different users only have one of those possible licenses. The one on the left has the Microsoft 365 Copilot in GCC license. The one on the right had the included version of Copilot. Both of them have a Copilot in the app launcher, but when they get here, their licensing determines what experience they have. Now, in the future, this happens in commercial tenants today, but what's going to happen in the future for us in GCC tenants is that when we have a user that is licensed for both, we get this toggle at the top, web and work. The user gets to decide, hey, do I want to leverage this against work data or do I want to leverage it against web data? So there should only be one app that will get us to this page as long as we are authenticated into Copilot with that work identity, that Entra identity. We used to call it Azure Active Directory. If we're located there, it will be available there. There was another question earlier, and I can't remember what it was. They were talking about some DLP things, and I wasn't 100% sure what they were talking about, but I'm wondering if what they were talking about is what's available in a preview tenant today, in a commercial tenant in preview today. So if we go into, that's not going to get me there. Let's try this one. So we have some DLP capabilities coming. They're in preview inside of a commercial tenant today. They're not quite there available in GCC today. Because if you think about when we create DLP policies in Microsoft 365, we're creating it against the data storage location. So, hey, something in email, if I'm trying to send something sensitive inside of email outside of my tenant, if there's a DLP policy protecting it, it's going to prevent it from leaving the organization. If it's stored in SharePoint and I use that default share to share externally, it's going to prevent it. Well, Copilot isn't a location necessarily. So how do we protect, like limit something from Copilot's reach? Well, that's where what we're doing now, what we're creating is these DLP policies. When we create a DLP policy, rather than doing what we're looking for sensitive type of information that we normally do, we're going to use a custom policies and a custom regulation. And then when we get into it, there is the ability for a location called Copilot. Now, Copilot's not a location, it's a tool that can access locations. Right now, we don't have the ability to limit this to administrative units in preview. I hope we don't get the ability to limit it to administrative units, because we really don't want to have that happen, but there are ways, there might be a use case for it right now in commercial anyway. But when we get into these locations, this has to be a G5 or an E5 level feature. We see Copilot as a location. So what does that mean then? Well, that means that when we have Copilot as a location, we're going to be able to come in and create this customized DLP rule that says our condition is that content contains a label. So we have to identify and label it with a sensitivity label. In my demo tenant, I've created one that says Copilot prevent processing. Why is that? Because that's our action that we can do, prevent processing. So I've always, since the beginning of Copilot, I've always preached that it is permission models and it is sensitivity labels that will prevent user access to content. So it also prevents Copilot access to content. This gives us the ability to create a label that itself may not have protections on it, does not limit who has access to it. But what we're ultimately wanting to do is say, okay, because I've labeled it with this label, Copilot, you can't process this anymore. So Copilot can't grab information from it. Copilot's not going to be able to summarize it for you, etc. So this is a way for us to kind of create some DLP related specifically to just Copilot. Doesn't matter where it lives, because normal DLP policies, where does the document live? With Copilot, we can create this policy and say, okay, now because it's labeled this way and we've created this DLP policy, it doesn't matter that John has access to that data. Copilot's not going to summarize that content for him anyway. So whoever
John,
had that DLP question, I wonder if that addressed their question. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so the question was, do you have any idea about the licensing that for what you just showed? Is that going to require G5, or will that also be available in G3?
From what I understand, it requires G5 today. Could it be part of G5 compliance? Possibly. I don't know enough about it yet to understand if a G5 compliance would give us that, but right now it's a full G5 feature.
Okay. And then I think we have about 5 minutes. 5 minutes left. I think we've answered all the questions. If there are any other questions, please do come back and chat. Outside of that, I'd like to extend what Demetrius has already offered. If you all need any help making the case for an investment with Copilot, we're happy to help you with an executive briefing. Or if you want to take the next step and are willing to invest in 100 licenses, we can explore Microsoft-funded engagement. With that, I think we can release. I appreciate everybody giving us the time today.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yes, thanks everybody for your time, and hey, questions come up, reach out to us. We're always here to help.